The Synchromistic presents Synchro-Mystique. Everyone knows about, and probably has an opinion on, the attacks on the New York City-based World Trade Center and the Washington, D.C.-based Pentagon, September the 11th, 2001. We won't dive into the contentious particulars here, such as the strangeness of ex-Director of Central Intelligence George H.W. Bush bunking over at the White House from September the 10th to the 11th, 2001. However crypto-politically and synchro-mystically relevant such facts may be and are. Instead, we'll approach things with a lighter touch, as much as is possible given the gravity of the day. For example, did you know that Mothman is said to have made an appearance? Mothman, of course, is a legendary creature in American folklore who was promoted in the 2002 Hollywood psychological thriller The Mothman Prophecies, featuring actors Richard Gere and Laura Linney. The movie adapted legendary Fortean writer John Keel's 1975 book by the same title. Keel had argued that the collapse on December 15, 1967, of the Point Pleasant Suspension Bridge, colloquially termed the Silver Bridge, had been presaged by scattered appearances of the Mothman creature in the vicinity of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Well, would you believe that New York resident Steve Moran photographed a winged entity near the ruins of the World Trade Center shortly after the attacks on September 11th? Anti-supernaturalists will predictably see nothing but an out-of-focus bird, but many paranormal enthusiasts contend that the image shows none other than the Mothman. Moran thinks it could have been an angel, which tends to connect Moran's picture with another one taken that fateful day, labeled Satan's Face by New York Magazine. With that curiosity setting the tone, we'll work our way back in time from the main event. As we do, ask yourself, what shall we make of the numerous uncanny associations with this 11th day of the 10th month, number 11? Switching from ostensible cryptids and miscellaneous Forteana to the inner workings of the deep state, we'll say that the 1990s saw a precipitous rise in the influence of so-called neoconservatism. Especially under George W. Bush, various neocons held positions in Washington, D.C.'s corridors of power. One immediate reason for this sea change was the perceived intelligence failures that occurred under the previous administration of William Jefferson Blythe III, otherwise known as President Bill Clinton. The neocon broadside is a complex topic. Here are highlights, or lowlights, from the short version. The late insider Admiral David E. Jeremiah critiqued the intelligence community's failure to foresee nuclear weapons testing by India and Pakistan in 1998. And then there's Donald H. Rumsfeld, U.S. Secretary of Defense under both Leslie Lynch King, Gerald R. Ford, and George W. Bush. In any case, Rummy questioned the intel community's ability to assess the ballistic missile threat to the United States. All this came to a head when then Director of Central Intelligence, George Tenet, who had appointed Jeremiah and Rumsfeld, discussed both men's findings at a senior intelligence conference. One conclusion reached was that there would be an imminent and catastrophic systemic intelligence failure. The conference date? September the 11th, 1998. Noticing that this was 3 years to the day before the 9/11 attacks, an official Central Intelligence Agency historian labels this a stunning prediction. No shit. By the way, the same historian adds that the prediction was remindful of the hauntingly accurate portrayals made in 1941 by U.S. military intelligence officers of how the Japanese Navy might attack Pearl Harbor. The real in-depth exploration of that theme was undertaken by Robert Stinnett in his 1999 book, Day of Deceit. We'll just mention one little thing here. Charles Lindbergh wanted to keep the United States from getting involved in World War II. He made numerous speeches to that effect on behalf of the America First Committee. In one such speech, delivered in Des Moines, Iowa, Lindbergh accused groups of insiders of trying to manipulate events to trick Americans into the war. He warned, they planned to create a series of incidents which would force us into the actual conflict. Of course, the attack on Pearl Harbor occurred 88 days later. Maybe it was just a happy guess on Lucky Lindy's part. The date of the speech? September 11, 1941. Eerie. Really eerie. Finally, perceptive sync compiler S.K. Bain, in his 2019 volume, Blackjack, noted that the so-called Starr Report, an investigation of the Clintons produced by attorney Kenneth Winston Starr, was dated September 11, 1998. By the way, Ken Starr died on September 13, 2022. The date of death narrowly missed the 11th. Speaking of near misses, have you heard the one about Frank Eugene Corder? He was a truck driver who crashed a stolen Cessna 150 onto the south lawn of the White House in the early hours of September 12, 1994, killing himself in the process. Reported on the 13th, the crash itself followed the theft of the aircraft late September the 11th, 1994. In case you were worried about them, the Clintons weren't at home. You see, they were the first family in 40 years to be relocated to Blair House, across the street from the White House, so that the executive mansion could be renovated. The date of this serendipitous move? Just for the night of September 11, 1994. Number 10. The Jewish-American financier widely known as George Soros started a hedge fund in 1973 under the name Quantum. Fast forward to 1992. There was a huge monetary crisis when the currency of the United Kingdom, known as the pound sterling, collapsed in value. In the months leading up to the crash, Soros had been building a huge short position, meaning his quantum fund was betting that the pound was going to tank. On Black Wednesday, September 16th, the day of the crash, Soros's bet paid off. He ended with a profit of around £1 billion, and in the process became known as the man who broke the Bank of England. To make a long and technical tale much shorter, let's say this: the crash did not occur in a vacuum. It was linked to other European countries, such as Germany and Italy. The plunge of the pound followed hard on the heels of pessimistic statements from the head of the German Federal Bank. Statements that, according to the Cato Institute, helped spark the run on the British pound. When were these incendiary statements made? Do you even have to ask? Friday, September 11, 1992, of course. For more on the alchemy of finance, see Top 10 Gold-Making Alchemists. Number 9. The fact that, in the United States, you dial the digits 911 to reach emergency responders might seem too obvious to mention. But it's worth remembering, firstly, that somebody had to decide on this. After all, they use 999 in Britain. Just don't look at that upside down. Stateside, 911 is something of a recent development. By 1979, 26% of the U.S. population could dial 911. This increased to 50% by 1987 and 93% by 2000. As of March 2022, 98.9% of the U.S. population has access. Well, when emergency service was evidently only accessible to roughly half the people in the country, the U.S. Congress designated a particular day as 911 Emergency Number Day via Public Law 99-448, which was signed by President Reagan and became the topic of his Proclamation 5696. We would do well to remember that the chosen day was September 11, 1987. Number 8. Let's take a look at the Marine veteran who was accused of assassinating JFK, Alec J. Heidel. Jekyll and Hyde. Shucks, I apologize. I meant to say Lee Harvey Oswald. To this day, mysteries swirl around him and lead to many nagging questions. We've tackled many of these questions before, but To get a flavor, don't you find it the least bit strange that Oswald had been in the Civil Air Patrol with alleged CIA-connected pilot and alleged hypnotist David Ferry? Isn't it odd that the Civil Air Patrol was co-founded by David H. Byrd, who also owned the Texas School Book Depository, where Oswald worked and from which he supposedly fired the magic bullet? And just what had Oswald done for the Marines when he was at Atsugi Naval Base in Japan, reported to be the hub for the CIA's U-2 spy plane operation, and incidentally a possible MK-Ultra mind control site? How did Oswald manage to get himself to Red Russia and back, with a Soviet wife no less? Why did white Russian expatriate and CIA informant George de Mohrenschildt cultivate such a close relationship with the comparatively lowly Oswald? What was the Central Intelligence Agency looking for when it assigned Monitor Reuben Efron to open Oswald's mail? You know, questions like those. But one question on our minds is, how remarkable is it that Oswald's Marine Corps discharge papers, dated the 1st of the month, evidently became effective September 11, 1959? While you're chewing on that one, here's another uncanny factoid about the company. Number 7. Almost invariably, if you look at popular surveys of the Central Intelligence Agency, you'll see its date of formation given as September 18th, 1947. For its part, Wikipedia provides no citation for this. If we turn, however, to an official compendium of foundational CIA documents, we do find an answer. The predecessor, Central Intelligence Group, formally became the Central Intelligence Agency on 18th September 1947. Well, there it is. Case closed, right? Well, the succeeding clause qualifies the foregoing with the words, Congress did not pass comprehensive enabling legislation for the agency until mid-1949. And this time, we do get a citation. The Central Intelligence Agency Act of 1949, dated 20th June, 1949. Is that date number 2? All this is made even stranger by the fact that elsewhere on the above-mentioned Wikipedia page, you can also read the following. The Central Intelligence Agency was created on July 26, 1947, when Harry S. Truman signed the National Security Act into law. What the? A third option? What gives? We don't pretend to know for sure, and at the admittedly great risk of muddying these murky waters even more, we propose a fourth possibility, as if you couldn't guess. If you actually look at one of the key documents, a letter from the first director of the Central Intelligence Agency, Admiral Roscoe Hillencutter, to the National Intelligence Authority, you'll see, emblazoned across the top, oh shoot, just look for yourself, Happy Birthday CIA. But this isn't the end of the festivities. We have another birth date to consider. Number 6. The premise of the U.S. Department of Defense's National 9/11 Pentagon Memorial is that a commercial aircraft, American Airlines Flight 77, the third out of 4 to be hijacked on September 11, 2001, crashed into the Pentagon, causing a partial collapse. For more on the number 77, see our recent virtual tour of the Four Corners. But as a slight detour, let's once again turn to the Fortean-minded journalist S.K. Bain. In 9/11 as Mass Ritual, Bain wrote about Ted Olson, U.S. Solicitor under President George W. Bush. Mr. Olson was born on September 11, 1940, and as fate would have it, Olson's third wife, Barbara, just happened to be a passenger on hijacked American Airlines Flight 77, which, on September 11, 2001, crashed into the Pentagon. Crazy, huh? As Mr. Bain knows, though viewers may or may not, 9/11 was a quite important day in the Pentagon's history, for reasons beyond the antics of alleged Flight 77 hijacker Hani Hanjour. You see, according to numerous online sources, construction of the Pentagon technically began when ground was broken, September 11, 1941. And you can even go to Wikipedia for that one. Number 5. We're going to shift gears and get all religious on you for a moment. A good place to start is the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893. Held in Chicago, Illinois, it's sometimes called the Chicago World's Fair. Like many cities that have hosted comparable extravaganzas, Chicagoans tried to make the place presentable, including covering building facades with a form of plaster of Paris. This gave everything a brilliant veneer and led some to christen the area the White City. Parenthetically, we'll direct viewers' attention to a lingering pall cast over the merriment by the horrifying and sensational murder spree visited on hapless tourists by the serial murderer Herman Webster Mudgett, alias Dr. H.H. Holmes. We may revisit Holmes another time, not least because of his synchronistically intriguing surname. But for now, what we really want to draw your attention to is the so-called Parliament of the World's Religions, seemingly incongruously unfolding on site while Mudgett was running amok. Wikipedia describes it as having been an attempt to create a global dialogue of faiths. The whole thing ran from about 6 days to a couple weeks, depending on the source you consult. But I forgot to mention, it was inaugurated September 11, 1893. Number 4. Now that we're in the vicinity anyway, let's talk Catholicism. After all, post-Vatican II, several recent CEOs of the Roman Church have busied themselves advancing ecumenism, a kind of interfaith dialogue that might have gotten them a ginormous booth at the 1893 World's Fair. Alternatively, you might call it the pontifical forerunner of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Anywho, the 5th century Pope St. Leo I, the Great, argued that he had inherited the decision-making prerogatives of the Apostle Peter. Likewise, his 6th century successor, Pope St. Gregory I, also the Great, advocated Rome's primacy as heir of St. Peter. By the 11th century, under Pope Leo IX, these claims, and some would say their elaborations, became a bone of contention between the Eastern churches, soon to be known as the Orthodox, with a big O, and their Western counterparts, leading to the Great Schism. The high watermark of Catholic rhetoric on the issue was Pope Boniface VIII's 1302 bull, Unam Sanctam, which translates "one holy." In that document, Boniface basically argued that secular kings, like his adversary Philip IV of France, were subject to his spiritual authority. This church-dominated order, or hierocracy, a rule by priests, held sway in Europe for hundreds of years. But when did this papalist system come to an end? Arguably, it was during the period of political unification, which saw various states like Naples, Sicily, Tuscany, and Venice join together into the Kingdom of Italy. But the real plum was Rome, and by association, the Vatican. So, the newly self-proclaimed Italian king, Victor Emmanuel II, asked Pope Pius IX, real nice-like surely, to give up peacefully. When the Pope refused, Italian troops came knocking. Pius IX recognized the approaching end of his reign as Pope King as Italian troops crossed over into the Pontifical State, September 11, 1870. Secular Italy would, however, be paid back in spades when German Field Marshal Albert Kesselring placed Italian territory under German military control, September 11, 1943. Weirdly, American patrols first crossed the border into Nazi Germany, September 11, 1944, prompting War History Online to call it an event of powerful symbolic importance. Took the words right out of my mouth. Here's a coda. The First Vatican Ecumenical Council convened December 8, 1869, but it came to a premature end on September the 20th, 1870 due to all the military commotion. Perhaps this is why John the 23rd gave his radio address concerning the Second Vatican Council, basically kickstarting the companion gathering, September 11, 1962. Number 3. And then there's Captain William Morgan. We've gotten into Morgan more in depth than other places. Suffice it to say here that Morgan was on the outs with his local Freemasonic lodge. Morgan decided that the Brotherhood's secrecy was un-American. He decided to blow the whistle on the blood oaths and ritualized chicanery going on in the name of fraternalism. But the Masons didn't see things the same way. Evidently true to their words, the story goes that they vowed to wreak vengeance on their antagonist. The dastardly and apparently deadly plot began with Morgan's arrest, reportedly on trumped-up charges. When was Morgan seized? According to one account, it was evidently on the 11th of September, 1826. Number 2. James Madison once told his fellow Constitutional Convention delegates that their burden should be to constitute the American Republic so as to protect the minority of the opulent against the majority. Given that, Homegrown preoccupations with the almighty dollar are practically as American as apple pie, and they go way back. Though, for the occult significance of the serpentine dollar sign, see our previous video, Top 10 Gold-Making Alchemists. Take Alexander Hamilton. He was a founding father of the United States. He fought in the American Revolutionary War, helped draft the Constitution, and was the founder and chief architect of the American financial system. This led Hamilton to the post of first U.S. Treasury Secretary under the venerable George Washington. These days, the Treasury represents the nexus of economics and espionage, as the Treasury Department conducts intelligence related to money. But did you know that according to the website of the U.S. Department of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton took the oath of office September 11, 1789? By the way, Hamilton had been one of the most prominent attendees at the Annapolis Convention, which met in pre-U.S. Constitution days to discuss beefing up the federal government on account of the multiple insurrections, including Shays' Rebellion, that were breaking out all over the place. The convention's first meeting? September 11, 1786. Plenty of other events have gone down on our fateful day. It's doubtful we could even hope to be exhaustive, but for a few runners-up, consider the following. The U.S. endorsed 1973 Chilean coup d'etat, led by General Augusto Pinochet, went down September 11, 1973. 7th Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev died September 11, 1971. And even though Japan officially surrendered September 2nd, 1945, when the Americans went in to try to arrest some of the higher-ups, erstwhile Prime Minister and Japanese General Tojo tried to commit suicide September 11, 1945. Or consider the so-called Whiskey Rebellion, more or less instigated by Alexander Hamilton's liquor tax, the tarring and feathering of a tax collector in Pennsylvania, September 11, 1791, is often identified as an important precursor to the out-and-out revolt that took place later, an important confrontation of which evidently took place September 11, 1794. There were a couple events related to Malta, which island we surveyed in Mystery Mediterranean. There are innumerable miscellanea. Let us know in the comments below if we missed anything of significance. That brings us to number 1. Admittedly, this one is a bit speculative, but hang in there for a moment. In our January 6 video, we briefly mentioned The Star of Bethlehem, a 2007 documentary from offbeat researcher Frederick Anthony Rick Larson. In it, Larson argued that what appeared in the night sky over the ancient Holy Lands had been a series of visually impressive conjunctions of Jupiter and Venus, calibrated to the orbit of the star Regulus. Larson plausibly believes that ancient peoples were much more used to looking up at the skies than we are today. They would have been keenly aware of celestial events like this. Larson evidently got some of his ideas from the late Ernest L. Martin, a booster of Herbert W. Armstrong's Worldwide Church of God, part of the sprawling Adventist movement. In the early 1950s, Martin was supposedly specialized in meteorology. He was also involved in research and development for high-altitude studies, specifically at Lowry Air Force Base. Is anyone else getting UFO vibes? You may recall that the Joint Air Force-CIA Robertson panel partially focused on the relationship of UFOs and psychological warfare. This was, by the way, also the subject of a secret 1952 memorandum from CIA's Assistant Director of Scientific Intelligence, H. Marshall Chadwell, to the Director of Central Intelligence, General Walter Beadle Smith, and it was dated September the 11th. Anyway, back to Martin. In 1996, he published The Star of Bethlehem, the star that astonished the world, and identified the Christmas star, basically with Jupiter. We're more interested in Martin's restatement of a hypothesis that he previously put forward in the 1980 book, The Birth of Christ Recalculated. See where this is going yet? As a dyed-in-the-wool Protestant and biblical literalist, Martin was concerned that the wintertime celebration of Jesus' birth did not adequately answer all the questions raised from the gospel narratives, like would the Romans have ordered a census during the rainy season, as the New Testament records in the Gospel of Luke chapter 2 verse 1 suggest? Or why would shepherds be out in the fields at night, per Luke chapter 2 verse 8, during cold and wet December, etc.? Given these minutiae, Martin calculated that Jesus Christ had actually been born in the late summer or early autumn of the year 3 BC. Do you really need to ask me what day? Why, September the 11th, of course, which Martin correlates with the Jewish Rosh Hashanah holiday, the Day of Trumpets, the Jewish New Year Day. How's that for a coinkydink? But to throw the ball back to S.K. Bain, this new datum would imply that all the dark 9/11 ritualism didn't just occur on some day or on any day. It went down on Jesus' birthday, esoterically speaking. And if that's true, well, wouldn't you say that it one-ups the idea that the whole thing was merely timed to coincide with the movements of Sirius, even if that star's namesake, Sirius the crime dog, did tragically die that day? And as Bob Dobbs might have said, it arguably ups the Orphic ante even for those who bet on connections with the ancient Egyptian New Year or with the flooding of the River Nile. Not that those don't also have their own associations with September 11th. Evidently, they do. Who knows? Maybe all these odds and ends are flights of fancy on my part. For all I know, I may have been primed from birth to pay special attention to 9/11. After all, on top of everything else, would you believe that my dad was born September 11th? So, happy birthday, Dad.